Thank you for joining us this morning for getting information on the new ag dedication programs that the County Real Property Tax Office will be rolling out over the next few years. It's actually in 2023 that the Hawaii County Council passed legislation to do a overhaul and revamp of the ag dedication programs that are available to property owners here on Hawaii Island. So this morning we have with us our real property tax administrator, Lisa Miura, as well as Hawaii County Assistant Real Property Tax Administrator, Keita Jo.
Okay, so I'm Lisa Miura. I'm your semi-incompetent at Zoom. And just so you know, we don't have Teams either. So we are really rolling along here on the technology side. Behind me is Keita Jo, who could not get his laptop to connect up. So we're having a fabulous morning. Yesterday we had our tax sale, and I would just like to say that it was a full house. We had over 432 people, and tax sales are our least favorite part of our job. So talking to you today about agriculture is going to be much nicer than what we've had to do in the past few weeks. But before we start the agricultural programs and changes, we wanted to cover just briefly about the exemptions and programs because they tie together now. And the reason they tie together is with all of the changes County Council made in 2023, it pertained over to the homeowner exemption side, which is a good thing for our locals that live here and are farming on their own properties. So Keita actually is going to cover this front part, and we're just going to switch seats.
Yeah. Again, thank you everybody for having us. We always enjoy talking all things real property tax. So it's a pleasure to be here. As Lisa mentioned, we're going to cover exemptions before we go into the agricultural programs and changes. Just to, again, give you a sense of how these programs kind of tie into each other, and it'll be a good background. As far as exemptions and programs, the biggest question is, why does the county provide exemptions? And really the exemptions are there to reduce the net taxable value of a property, which in turn reduces taxes. So there's a basic equation when it comes to real property tax is you start generally with an assessed value and you subtract out exemptions to get what's called a net taxable value. And that net taxable value is then tied into and calculated along with a tax rate in order to get the actual taxes that an individual pays on a property. It's important to understand that real property tax really covers the value portion and the exemption portions of property in this equation. The tax rate is set by council, and they can do it on an annual basis. So sometimes there's a misnomer that out there that, the county needs more money, so they're just going to increase the values. In fact, real property tax prescribes to the International Association of Assessing Officers. And so we follow their guidelines when it comes to determining our values, measuring our values. And that's a nationwide organization for mass appraisal. So what do the exemptions do, and who does it help? There's exemptions that will reduce the actual value of a property in the case of agricultural programs. There's exemptions that will reduce the assessed value so that we get that net taxable value again. And that can be in the form of disability exemptions. We even have an enterprise zone exemption, veterans exemptions for totally disabled veterans, which are tied to service-related injuries. Charitable miscellaneous exemptions, and our most popular one is homeowner by far. So we have over 140,000 parcels within Hawaii County that's vacant and improved parcels, and over 40,000 of those properties are receiving a homeowner's exemption. And so by far that's the most beneficial to many individuals for their primary residences. We also provide a public utilities exemption. So businesses like Helco, who in lieu of paying real property taxes, they pay Treasury a percentage of their monies that they make. There's a PUC exemption for that. And then Kuleana Hawaii County has a significant number of Kuleana parcels, so we always try to plug that for our Native Hawaiian community. And so that's a huge benefit. It can reduce the net taxable value down to our $200 minimum tax if you can get OHA to certify the property as Kuleana. The other opportunity to reduce value is through a native forest dedication, and that works similarly to an agricultural dedication to reduce the actual value of a property. The next slide or page, I'd want to take some time to talk about the tax classifications and rates. So we have various classifications for property, and we go based off of highest and best use generally, underlying that typically aligns with the zoning that's there. But we have residential, apartment, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and native forest, conservation, hotel, resort. So you have those classifications as base classifications. So in absence of participating in either the affordable rental program or, as I mentioned before, the homeowners program, properties would be taxed based off of those rates. So for residential less than $2 million, it's $11.10 for every $1,000 of net taxable value. And you'll notice a couple things on this slide. You'll notice the affordable rental and the homeowners tax classifications are by far the lowest. That's why we mentioned for most people, their largest tax benefit is participating in a homeowners program. And then you see the agricultural native forest. So even though the agricultural programs, they reduce the net taxable value or the assessed value of a property, you'll see those properties still are tied to that $9.35 tax rate. And then I'll go to the next slide. I'll just cover the homeowner's application because there's two parts to the homeowner's application. There's the portion that ties into the exemption itself. So going back to that formula, the exemption will reduce the net taxable value of a property. And County Council had enacted legislation recently to increase the base exemption amount for those individuals that are 80 years old and above. And that's now at $125,000. So over the last couple of years, they've been increasing that in recognition that the market value has increased in part. The other thing to realize is that along with an age component to that exemption, there's also an additional 20%, and that's the 20% of the assessed land and building value that's also tied into the exemption. So for example, someone who lives in a $500,000 home and is under 60 could get $150,000 off their assessed value. So that's 50,000 because they're under the age of 60 plus an additional 20% up to 100,000. So that's the exemption portion. The other portion of the homeowners program is the actual tax rate. So in the previous slide, you saw that $5.95. Parcels that are participating in the homeowners tax class generally will receive that lower tax rate. And along with that lower tax rate, there's what's called a 3% cap. So from year to year, even if the market is increasing twofold, threefold, whatever it might be, if an individual is participating in the homeowners program and is receiving the homeowners tax class or rate, they will also get a 3% cap, meaning we will not increase the assessed value no more than 3%. So all things equal, if County Council doesn't change tax rates year to year to year, an individual's taxes, if they're in the homeowners program, will not increase any more than 3%. Again, that's if the tax rates are the same year to year to year. As in the previous slide, you know, those tax rates are subject to change on an annual basis. So the other thing to be cognizant of when looking at the actual tax classification is it excludes short-term rentals, so rentals less than 180 days on a property, even if that is a primary residence. What it does include, and this is with recent changes, County Council recognized the housing crisis that exists in regards to creating long-term housing for a lot of our residents. And so what they in turn did was they now allow long-term rentals on primary residences without losing that class. So in the past, properties may have seen, maybe there's two houses. I live in one house, I rent out the second house on my property. I wasn't able to get that lower $5.95 tax rate and that 3% cap because it was kind of seen like here's a commercial component to the property. And so in the past, you couldn't get that cap. And with the market the way it is or has been, a lot of individuals were feeling a huge increase in their taxes. And they were doing good for the community, right? They were providing long-term housing. And so county council closed that. And now if there are two houses on that property, one's being rented out long-term, that property can still receive the benefits of the homeowner's tax class and rate. The other thing that's also important to understand too is in the past, if a property that's a primary residence was also participating in an agricultural use program, they weren't able to receive that homeowner's tax rate in class. The county council closed that and recently with legislation. And so now if a property is participating in an agricultural use program and it's part of an individual's primary residence, they can continue to receive that lower tax rate. One thing to point is these two things work independently of each other. So just because a property is receiving an exemption does not necessarily mean it'll receive that tax classification. And again, short-term rentals is an example of why that is. This next slide right here talks about what happened with the county's agricultural programs. So as Kapono had mentioned in 2023, there was a huge push by county council to update the agricultural programs, which included sunsetting the non-dedicated agricultural use program. And Lisa will talk about the timing of that a little bit later. And then also updating some of the requirements for the long term. This is our 10-year dedication program. And then they also created two other agricultural programs called the Community Food Sustainability Program, as well as a short-term 3-year dedicated ag program. And so what prompted the change was a few items that came into focus. One was an audit. IAAO, I mentioned them before. They came in and they did an audit of the real property program that we have here. And they came up with a few recommendations. Those recommendations mirrored ad hoc task force and review working groups. We've had many of those over the course of the last 10, 12 years. And it really focused around how to incentivize agriculture, keep that investment, because the investment has grown to $37.4 million in agriculture on an island. So everybody recognizes the importance of ag on the Big Island, the identity for our community. So it's important to protect that and limit the loopholes. And these were the loopholes that led to land banking. So we had some individuals come in, purchase land, maybe large tracts of land, put one goat on that property, and by all intents and purposes would still qualify for an agricultural benefit. And so county council wanted to close some of those loopholes in that regard. And the legislation has changed. So you may have seen some of the documents out there that have evolved since September, even since July, August. And that's because as things come into focus and we start implementing these changes, county council has since gone back, updated the legislation, provided some more time in terms of application and clarification on some of the intended or some of their intentions with regard to our new programs that they provided. This next slide talks about schedules and deadlines. So this is a good reference for anybody. We're very cyclical in real property tax. At the same time every year, we're sending out bills. We also send out assessment notices the same time every year. So in the next month, 2 months, March 15th, we're going to issue assessment notices. that generally is an opportunity for taxpayers and their only opportunity to contest valuations exemptions. So if you're representing a client or yourself for that matter, and you feel that our assessment is incorrect, you feel aggrieved by it, maybe someone should have gotten an exemption they felt they were entitled to, that would be the time to contact our office. We always say contact our office first because our appeal deadline is April 9th, but there might be some items that we can correct informally and issue a corrected notice without having to go through a formal appeal process. That formal appeal process also includes a non-refundable $50 fee. And so we like to prevent individuals from losing $50 when, maybe there was a correction to our record that needed to occur. So I just want to point that out. But going back to our agricultural use focus, September 1st generally is our deadline for agricultural dedications. So whether it's the existing 10-year dedication or the new 3-year dedication, the deadline to file for that will be September 1st on an annual basis. The biggest exception that happened this year because of the sunsetting of the non-dedicated program was the fact that we're no longer accepting any non-dedicated ag use applications after September 1st of this year. And so that's part of the sunsetting of that program. We started allowing the application for community food sustainability and short-term dedication on September 2nd of this year.
Keita, just to clarify, you mentioned September 1st of this year, but that's just 2024, which was last year. So was it?
Oh, sorry.
You talking about the fiscal year, maybe?
No, sorry. It's September 1st of 2024. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a new year. My brain's still in 2024. So, yeah, generally speaking, that September 1st deadline is every year. So moving forward, if an individual wants to participate in a dedicated program, they will need to file to our office by September 1st. So as an example, if someone were to file their application by September 1st of 2025, if approved, they would start seeing that reduction in their assessed value and their bill come July 1st of 2026. So there is a 9-month lag in regard to when the deadline to apply is and when the benefit will start to be received. And that's tied to fiscal year considerations. The next slide is our website. We will be going through a refresh of our website in the next few months. We want to make it a little bit more easy, user-friendly for individuals, for everybody involved. But right now, your agricultural program changes. All the forms, information, we even have, and Lisa will cover it, 2 really important documents. One document is the requirements for all the agricultural programs, and we have it all on one sheet. And then we also have the benefits for each of the programs, which we'll cover a little bit later. But if you go to hawaiipropertytax.com, you go to our homepage, go to forms, you'll see a drop down. And then within that drop down, you'll see a link right here, agricultural programs effective September 2nd, 2024. And that will send you directly to the various documents that we have. So by all means, please use this to assist you with the decision-making process. And if you have any questions, the big thing with real property tax is give us a call. We're more than happy to walk you through your specific situation or your client's specific situation to help you navigate the process. It is quite daunting. We went from what essentially was 2 programs to right now we have technically 4 programs. We're going down to 3. So it can get fairly confusing for a lot of people. Also on our website, there's a quick FAQ that covers all of our agricultural program changes, the sunsetting of the non-dedicated agricultural use program, what other programs an individual can apply for, and so forth. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Lisa, who's going to walk us through that requirements and benefits of the different ag programs. But before I do that, are there any questions?
Yeah, Kato, we actually had one question in particular that was repeated a couple of times regarding the homeowner's exemption
Okay.
and specifically the age exemption.
Okay.
And so, with those age exemptions, does the county automatically lower the rate as the owner ages, or do they have to resubmit as they reach those various milestones?
Yeah, you do not need to resubmit. The only time that you would resubmit a homeowner's application if something changes with the property. For example, the most common items that we ask people to reapply is when there's a commercial use tied to a property or if they start doing short-term vacation rental. Those can have huge implications. But absent of those major changes, um, you apply once, and then on the application, you provide us with your date of birth. And so we'll automatically utilize that date of birth. And if you, for example, as of January 1st, if you turn 60, that will increase your exemption from the 50 to 85,000 and so on and so on. So there isn't a need to reapply. Good question.
Okay, we got one more question that just came in. Maybe a little bit more clarification might be needed, but what is the actual difference between the homeowner exemption and the homeowner tax class?
Yeah, so the exemption is a dollar amount, right? So let's say we go back to that $500,000 example, right? Someone who's under the age of 60, they would generally get the 150,000 off. So we would compute their taxes based off of 350,000 generally. Let's say they weren't doing any short-term vacation rental. This was their primary residence. They're not doing any other commercial activity on the property. It's purely their primary residence. They would receive that homeowner's tax class. If, for example, they were doing a short-term vacation rental on the property, they wouldn't receive that $5.95. In all likelihood, they would probably be receiving the residential $11.10. And so that's the differentiation between the receiving the class and not is generally that commercial component. And so if it's your primary residence, you don't use it for anything else, you'll get that 595. But if you start to use it for short-term vacation rental or full-fledged business with parking spaces and whatnot, then you wouldn't receive that lower tax rate and cap.
And so the real property tax class really sets the rate per $1,000 of value that you end up paying. And the homeowner's exemption, as I understand, in the case of the example of the short-term vacation rental, you can still have an exemption, but that be applied proportionally,
Mhm.
I guess percentage-wise, to the portion of your property that you are using exclusively for principal use versus the short-term rental use, correct?
That's correct. And just one clarification on that proportion. So for example, let's say you had that $500,000 house and half of it was being used for short-term vacation rental. 50% of the house is eligible to receive the 150,000. So in reality, if someone was doing a short-term vacation rental on that $500,000 property, they would still receive the full 150,000. So it's not where you're using it 50% and you're only going to get 75,000 now on the exemption. So just wanted to clarify that. So a vast majority of properties, even though there is a short-term vacation rental, they're in all likelihood still receiving the full exemption amount.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I think one other question before we get to Lisa's portion, and Lisa might know the answer to this, and maybe you do as well. A copy of the slides, we have them. Are we able to distribute them to our members after this presentation today?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
our
you.
goal is to get the information out there. And again, thank you all for assisting us with this process. It's huge for us. So yeah, please share. Please share.
Okay. One more question before you go, because it just came in. How does a home office exemption work, I guess, in relation to the homeowner exemption?
Yeah. So for home offices, it's an allowable use through the planning department. It doesn't involve signage, parking spaces. For all intents and purposes, that's still an allowable use, and that property will still receive the full benefit of both the exemption as well as that lower homeowner tax class and rate.
All right, thank you. I do see one more question, but I do think it might be answered with Lisa's presentation, and
Okay.
if not, I'll make sure to ask it. But thank you very much,
Yeah,
Keita.
thank you. All right, without further ado, here's Lisa. Here we go.
Okay, you can see my whole head because I'm a little taller than Keita. I saw his chair was a little low. So he's very calm and collected when he speaks. I get a little bit more excited, especially when it comes to the homeowner. And I just wanted to recap for everyone, because if you've been a realtor here or living here for a long time, not being able to get the agricultural lower use value when doing active ag and the homeowners to allow you to get both. They used to fight it before and say, oh, that's double dipping programs. But when it came back that you have so many farmers and ranchers living on the land that they're farming and using it for sustainable purposes, for them to get the homeowners tax class is a huge change to our county code. And I feel like that got really downplayed with all the changes to the ag, and everybody was so concerned about how this is going to kick them out of it, that that part really got overlooked a lot between the media, the election, and even with the rules, the rule making for the finance director. So if you know of anyone who is doing both, we're going to try and make it a huge push on our assessment notice by putting a different form in there with different wording, hopefully less government wording that will catch individuals' eyes. But to me, that's one of the biggest changes that really can affect people who live here that are farming or ranching on their properties, because never could you qualify for both. You could get the exemption, but not that lowest tax rate. And more importantly, the 3% cap on assessed values from increasing. And we all know how crazy properties have been selling. And it's not like it was just the land that increased. The value, the cost, everything else has gone up. Okay, that's it for my spiel on it. I just wanted to make sure that point really got across, because we've done presentations and people walk away and still don't quite get that you can apply for both now. The other one Keita mentioned, huge. So you have farm properties, and I've seen quite a bit pop up where they have a farm worker living in the second dwelling, but they never applied for the affordable rental program. And because they were either charging more, they felt like, oh, I'm already getting the ag value, so I can't get the lower tax rate, but they absolutely can. So even if the owner or the principal farmer isn't living on that property, and most of them will charge honestly $150 to $300, some charge nothing. They can also qualify for the affordable rental program if all the dwellings on that property are being utilized by their farm workers. So even if they're not living there, again, the affordable rental will qualify on top of the lower ag use value. And I can't tell you how much money that has saved. So while a lot of people think all these changes through the ag program was to increase our taxes, honestly, it may actually lower it, because even though we're tightening up on what properties are getting the lower ag use value, for those where you're really housing farm workers and the owners are living there, they're actually paying less in taxes. So that to me is one of the more exciting parts of the program. Okay, so what I told Capono was I sent him the updated slides on this, and we sent it out as a PDF because the PowerPoint is way too huge. But online, I didn't like the way this screen looked. I know Capono mentioned when he went on, his was showing July 24. My screen online was showing the October 21st. As Keita mentioned, to get to all of this, you're just going to go through our forms tab, the agricultural programs effective, and then they're all listed here. I do not like the way our front end of the website looks, and I know this is hugely used by a lot of realtors. And so while we're changing the front end, it's not going to be such a drastic change that it's going to make it harder to find anything. We're hoping it's easier. The other problem with our current system is, well, one, it's about 16 years old, is that you can't really look at it well from your mobile phone. So if you've used it in the field on your mobile phone, you're noticing parts are getting cut off or they're getting truncated. And it's really frustrating to get the information you want. So hopefully when we move over to this new front end, it'll be this, it'll look and feel easier for you to use. But as far as the back end and your search features, that will all be the same. That's not changing. There is a push, and I don't want to get too excited because I have in the past and been very disappointed. We used to have all our building permit information out there. Keita doesn't even know about this, but we had all the building permit information. It was huge. You could see what we had reflected because we care about buildings, not the electrical and the plumbing permits. But below it, we used to have building permit information. And I know if you've been here for more than since prior to Mitch Roth's administration, then you used to be able to see it all in one place. And it was really handy, especially for realtors when you were looking up if a property was permitted. Under that administration, when they moved to Epic, they took that away from us. A lot of things happened during that period. And we were not able or allowed to get the data or host it on our website anymore. And that caused a lot of frustration towards our office, even though it wasn't our call. And so this current administration has already asked about what it would take for us to put it back on our website. So we are trying to work with the new director on seeing if they will help us to get that back on to our website. I'm not sure how it's going to work. As most of you know, Epic is a very different program, and getting data out of it is it's difficult for us. So hopefully you have some trick that we don't even know about, but we're hoping it'll make our lives all easier, which should be the goal of government. Okay, so getting back to this, the requirements and benefits of the different ag programs. With all of these changes, it was extremely overwhelming even for our staff. So we created spreadsheets to show, okay, here is all of them side by side. I do this when I want to purchase things, an iPhone or whatever it is outside, or vacuum, to see what types of things are available on the accessories and yada, yada, yada. So with this one, we created it so that you could take a look. And if someone was in the non-dedicated ag program, you'll see that it's all grayed out. And the reason that's grayed out is, well, you can't apply for that program anymore. But that's all I might have known if I was in that program. So I can look and see, what the zoning requirements are. They're pretty much still all very the same. You have to be in some type of agricultural zoning. I know I've received phone calls in the past from realtors that said, oh, the code says it can be residential and agriculture. And they thought that meant residential across the board, just residential zoning, whether it was RS10, RS15. And unfortunately, that's not what that residential and agricultural means. There's actually a specific type of zoning that is residential and agriculture. So you always have to have agricultural tied into that zoning to allow for the programs. That was before, and that's the same now. That didn't change. As far as the application dates, you could apply for the non-dedicated ag program up through December 31st of each year. That's the same for the community food sustainability, which they created. The short term, which is currently at 3 years, and the long term, which is 10 years, both have a deadline of September 1st of each year. And this always applies to the forward year, as far as when you're going to see the lower taxes. There was no minimum lot sizes with the non-dedicated ag, and this was the hugest, I think this is the hugest thorn in a lot of people's sides, because there was no minimum lot size in the non-dedicated ag, and now there is one in the short term. So the short term and long term do have minimum sizes, and there is a caveat or a but to it. There's a lot of buts or asterisks, whatever you want to say, to each of these. And I know Keita uses fancy words. I'm not going to. I'm just going to keep it as simple for me to understand and not mess up here. The minimum lot size for community food sustainability, there is none. So there's none there. And a lot of people thought the CFS program, and I'm going to call it CFS just so I don't have to keep saying community food sustainability, because government just loves their acronyms. they thought that was what replaced the non-dedicated ag, and that's actually not true. What replaced the non-dedicated ag program is the short-term dedicated. And the reason why I say right now it's a 3-year program is there is a bill coming before council, and it's going through committee first, and I believe it's the first committee hearing in February, that one new council member is trying to change that 3 years to 5 years. And that's based on what he claims was a lot of feedback from ranchers and farmers that said having to reapply every 2 to 3 years is very tedious, and they wanted it to be a little bit longer. So we'll see if that goes through council. I'm not sure they're going to go for it or not. It took them a long time to come up and approve the 3-year program. But we'll see. The benefits for the short-term dedicated is a lot similar to the non-dedicated. And I will cover that in the next slide. But for now, the minimum sizes that got lowered. So if you remember in the past, the pasture and slow rotation forestry was 10 acres. That got lowered to 5 acres. The feed crops or fast rotation forestry was 5 acres. That got lowered to 2.5 acres. When it comes to orchards, which we see a lot of when it comes to your coffee farms and mac nuts, that's at 1 acre. And your intensive ag and your diversified ag. Diversified ag is a new category, and it can include a little bit of each. And a lot of times that includes our Hawaiian style of farming, where you might see some sweet potato, some dryland kalo. You're going to see some pigs and tea leaves. And so that usually comes under diversified ag, where you're going to end up changing out, you're going to replenish the soil, and you're going to change things out with other crops so that you don't have to come back to property tax to let us know what changed. You're in a diversified agricultural category. And those are at 1/4 acre. Before I go further from here, because I know this has been a big point of contention, I'm just going to ask Kapono if there was any questions so far on what we covered.
Yes, we do have one, and it's regarding meeting those minimum land or lot size requirements. The question is, can TMKs be combined to reach a minimum acreage?
Absolutely, yes. So that is a good thing. And those parcels don't need to be adjacent to each other. They don't need to be contiguous. They can be honestly on different sides of the island. You just have to show us, usually in the farm plan, and I'm going to cover why the farm plan can be a huge help in those cases, because you're letting us know I have a farm operation. I don't meet the minimum size there, but when you have all of your parcels together, it does meet that size.
I'm going to echo what Jeff Callie said in the chat. Wow, that's good information. Good to
It
know.
is. Yeah, it's something that really got overlooked. We had covered it in the rules and regs, but it was so long. And I think some of these points got missed out, but it's a little bit easier when you see it in this chart here. And then I have a little note there below the pasture or slow rotation forestry that says, if the farmer ranch operation property or properties do not meet the minimum size, then a farm plan must be turned in with the application. The farm plan is pretty much the asterisk. So if you're not hitting a $2,000 income requirement, do a farm plan. If you're not hitting the minimum size, do a farm plan. Show us how you're still adhering to generally accepted guidelines. And a big example that I will give is horses. So some counties and jurisdictions around the country have started to exclude horses from being part of the agricultural use program. Hawaii County took another turn and said, horses and ranching, using horses on ranches, is a big part of our agricultural program on the island of Hawaii. And so they are continuing to honor raising horses. Now, if you've got one horse on 10 acres and you're not doing anything else with it, that may be a little bit hard if you can't justify that you're using it with other ranches, that you're maybe you're using that horse to work other ranches. A lot of cowboys take their horses home. They don't leave them on that ranch. They bring them home to their property. That horse could be used to breed with other horses, to perpetuate using horses on ranches. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's a lot of it is what you put on the farm plan. And there's no, here's the best way to cheat the system and do it. Like, we don't put that out there. But if it's adhering to generally accepted practices here, then it will be accepted. One area that does not, that I recognize personally, is very common is fighting roosters. We know fighting roosters has been a part of Hawaii and certain cultures for many years. That did not pass the test by agricultural departments and the county council as being considered a viable active agricultural use that was going to benefit the island as a whole. So if those roosters are being used to breed to create hens and chicks, that's one way. But if your whole thing is, I'm just raising fighting roosters, then they will not be eligible for the agricultural programs. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a sensitive topic when it comes to fighting roosters, as we have definitely heard from a lot of individuals. And you can make good money on them, but it's not legal money. So a little bit different than what they're trying to encourage.
Lisa, what's with the farm plan?
Mhm.
Is it a form? Is there a template that the real property tax office has?
Yes, we actually did create a template. We worked with there's multiple soil and water conservation districts, and we did work with two of them to help create the farm plan template, which is also online, and I'm going to be covering it as well. Not every single line of it, but I'll cover the highlights of why the farm plan is a great alternative to some of the other requirements of our programs.
And then I guess real briefly, before we move on, can you explain what non-dedicated ag use means? We know that it's going away, but what was, or I guess it maybe is, as you said, the short-term dedicated kind of replaces it. What is non-dedicated ag use?
So years ago, there was just a long-term 20-year commercial dedicated program. And then through the years, it got shortened to 10 years because 20 years was too much of a commitment. And under Harry Kim's first term, they had created a group that decided, okay, we want to create this non-dedicated agricultural program to catch those that are doing agricultural use but don't want to dedicate. So it's going to have a higher value per acre than the dedicated, but it would have different requirements. And one of them was, originally it was supposed to be applied for every year. That got extremely tedious for our property tax office. We don't have ag experts. We're hired as appraisers to set values. Another group enters your exemptions, and another group collects your taxes. And so they found that it became very overwhelming to have annual applications for the non-dedicated ag. So they were really allowing only new owners, or requiring only new owners to apply. If you've changed your program, or if we came out and saw you had no active ag, then you would reapply. The problem with that, according to the audit that was done, is because our tax office is so focused on picking up building permits and confirming that this is a valid sale and setting values and all of the programs and what we need to review for that, nobody was really going in and checking every single non-dedicated ag property. As a result, it had grew to over 11,000 parcels. And during spot checks, it was noticed a lot weren't doing any active agriculture. Some may not have even realized they applied for the program many years ago. So anytime you stop requiring new applications, it's easy to kind of fall off the radar. It could have been properties that maybe my grandparents had that passed down to my mom, for example, and then to me. And I wasn't aware that that was in a program. Even though I get the assessment notice, I mean, most people are really looking at the bottom line if they're looking at it at all. And so I think there was a combination of education that needed to go out to the public. But by making this change, it really does have people reapply for it. The non-dedicated ag had no minimum sizes. And so it became where some people thought this was where I had my square foot garden in the backyard. But it was never supposed to be meant for that purpose. It just evolved into that. And so we had some appraisers looking at it thinking, well, there's not enough rules on it. There's not enough meat in the code. Like we didn't know what was really allowed or not. And that's when we were starting to allow one sheep on 5 acres. And then you'd have the real ranchers come in screaming that, you know, they're spending lots of money and time to keep their fences up. And here we're giving the same benefit to someone. And honestly, that doesn't even live here, that saved a sheep to help a neighbor, and they're getting this minimum tax of $200. So anyway, that's what the non-dedicated ag was. It turned into really a beast that needed to kind of be looked at. And instead of really looking at it, council did away with it and just created new programs that they felt would be more beneficial to sustainability going forward.
So of these 3 programs, the CFS, the short-term dedicated, and the long-term dedicated, is there a category for homeowners who cultivate crops for personal consumption and sustainability?
So the community food sustainability would be your closest one to it. And it depends what their subsistence is, right? So we went through this with the agricultural group. The community food sustainability, which keep in mind, the non-dedicated ag wasn't for self-subsistence either. It was not meant to be for self-subsistence. It ended up getting utilized that way, but it was not intended for that. So the self-subsistence, we would hope at after 5 years, because right now with CFS, you can get into it and have no income. You're not selling anything. But what the hope is that after 5 years, when you reapply, you'll be at a point where you're donating $1,000 to a nonprofit, whether it's like a food basket, a community meals, churches, the schools, and you're sharing beyond just your property or yourself or your family.
And then as far as chickens, do you have to prove that the chickens are then being used for egg use? Or, how would somebody provide proof of that? Or would it even work for if you're selling the roosters and hens themselves?
Yes. So as long as it's contributing to being able to be sustainable, or a type of active agricultural use. I mean, it's the same with horses and chickens. So we're not eating horses, but that is a form of pasture and livestock. As far as chickens and hens go, you do not have to show us that they're producing eggs. There's times where some do and some don't, and they get used for meat, or they donate it or give it to another place. So it's going to be through the receipts. If you're applying for the short-term or long-term dedicated or the CFS, there's farm plans, and you would just explain that you are raising them, and what your farm really is about. Is your farm about having hens and breeding them to sell to others or to give them away? There's 4-H programs that take animals, and so if you're working on the 4-H program, then you would note that, which is also a generally accepted agricultural program or use in Hawaii. And same thing with eggs. If your intent is to sell them, then you would list that down on your farm plan. And we don't need real specifics, like I hope to get 5 or 6 dozen a week and sell it at $7. I mean, we're not looking for that kind of detail.
All right. And I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Okay. So when it comes to fallow was something that would come up often. We go look at properties year after year, especially if there were sales, right? And we get new apps and they would say, oh, the soil's bad, we're in fallow. But they weren't doing anything to help the soil get better. So there are fallow guidelines on here, and there is a maximum amount of fallow you can have. There are going to be, again, there's an asterisk and a big but. So for the community food, you can't have more than one of those 5 years where your property or your land is in fallow, which means you have no animals, you have no trees, you have nothing going on, because you're saying, I need to let the soil replenish. A common one is ginger. Ginger is very, very hard on the ground. And I'm not talking about the ginger flowers, it's the ginger roots that we eat. And so in the past, we were told, well, we got to let the ground sit, but there's other plants you can utilize to grow that would help with the soil. And there's a lot of programs with the University of Hawaii that can assist farmers as well. When it comes to intensive ag, orchards, diversified ag, when you're in the short-term dedicated, it's no more than one of the 3 years. It's only a 3-year program. And then if you are in the long-term, then they're allowed 3 years of fallow. And so that's helpful because in the past, fallow wasn't always recognized. And so some appraisers would go out and be like, oh, there's nothing going on. We're going to send you a disallowance letter. And there are legitimate fallow periods that land needs. Even though we're in a tropical climate, you can't expect your ground to be producing or your land 100% of the time, 12 months out of the year, because then you really reduce the amount of nutrients that the land provides. And so that's not good agricultural practice either, is to always continuously utilize your land. When it comes to ranching, fallow might be a rotation schedule. So they're rotating livestock from one property to another. And that's a whole different schedule that is located on the farm plan. And rotations are allowed. We're not saying, okay, you have 25 sheep, you always have to have 25 sheep on your property. Some years you're going to have a drought, you're going to have to cut the sheep back. But a real rancher is going to know that. Somebody coming in that says, what's the bare minimum I need to have on sheep to get this? And then how often can I, like, if they're not keeping track, we can't tell you what your drought schedule is going to be. It's going to change. But you will know which other pastures or what friends you're going to be rotating your sheep on. And so I think those are the types of things in the farm plan. People get frustrated because they want us to give them the answer, but we're not here to tell people exactly what they need to do. We're not agricultural experts. All we know is the information you put back on the form for us to review. And when we have questions, we will reach out to agricultural experts. I'll share an example. Somebody applied for the ag with a bee hotel. It's a new thing. You have one, it's like a bird tree, but a bird house, but for one solitary bee. We sent that off to agriculture. I mean, it didn't pass our sniff test, but we didn't know if that's a new thing coming up. We didn't know about Korean natural farming. We learned that's a whole thing. Even though it looks like a lawn, there's some validity to it. So we reached out to the agriculture experts and they came back and said, no, that's a hobby. Having one bee hotel or bee house for a solitary bee is not what they would consider an agricultural use program. And so we don't make all the decisions. We will have to reach out to experts in that field. There are crop restrictions when it comes to the non-dedicated ag. There were none in there. When it came to the community food sustainability, and I'm going to attempt to share another slide so you can see the whole thing, requirements. And Kapono, can you tell me if the agricultural programs at a glance came up or if I need to try and...
Yes, I can see the at a glance.
Okay, and it's the whole page one though, not the short one?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let me zoom in because I cannot read that small, and I'm sure nobody here can unless you're still in your 20s. It will show here that originally when they did the community food sustainability, no pasture was allowed. And so they did revise that to allow pasture livestock used for food production. And their whole purpose with a community food sustainability was, they wanted it to be for food. But the unintended consequence of that was they were missing that livestock are food, and there are other areas that they were considering part of the community food sustainability that was not food. And an example would be potted plants, orchids, that are very, very viable here still, and they were not included, but because of how the definitions were, we had to allow for it legally, and that was per the attorneys. When it comes to the short-term dedicated, everything's really allowed except you can't have noxious weeds. In the intensive ag orchards, I diversified ag crops. And noxious weeds might be albizia. It might be, I think it's one of the strawberry guavas. Controlled substances are not allowed. That primarily, the only one that I am aware of right now is marijuana. And so right now it is not allowed because according to Corporation Counsel, it shows up still on the federal, one of the federal lists for a controlled substance. And so it's currently not allowed in the program. And yes, we do get people that ask to get an agricultural use program based on marijuana growing. Okay, so let me go back to the far left. Signatures of all owners. The code will state all owners need to sign. When the rules and regulations were created, we asked the director to allow that only to be for living owners. Our ask to council at the time was just to allow one owner to sign, because we all know you have those owners or properties where you've got tons of owners and only one is really taking care of the taxes and the property. Or maybe it's two, but you don't have all of them. Some are living in the mainland. Sometimes probate wasn't done. Whatever it was, we felt it was important that we didn't need them all. That didn't go through. All that we could push was all living owners. So the living owners do need to sign. And if somebody has passed away, they just need to let us know that they're deceased. In regards to requirements, when it comes to non-dedicated ag, very minimal was written about it. It was meant to copy the dedicated ag program. So they got a lot more specific. And when they say they, I just want to be clear, county council sets legislation over on this side of the county. We have two parts, right? There's the mayor and all of us down below it. And then there's the county council. County council creates the legislature, they do the bills. That affects the county code, which is technically the law that we have to follow. Whether Kate and I agree with all of it or not, I can tell you we don't agree with all of it, but we have to live by that in our jobs in these positions. And that sometimes can be very difficult because we're not fans of certain things, but that's what we have to do. Under the mayor's side, the finance director and all appointed directors have rules, and that's where they are telling us in our little divisions how we're going to follow this county code, because the code is written in a way, and sometimes it's very specific, but there are always areas of vagueness because you can't catch every single instance. So when they create the rules, they can clarify items, they can make exceptions, they can make it a little bit easier for us to do our jobs without always having to follow that strict one sentence in there. And sometimes it's the word shall that we cannot get away from. We prefer when they use the word may so that there's some wiggle room, but a lot of legislation coming through right now has the word shall in it. Corp counsel, which is our attorneys, then take the rules and make sure that we're not going fully against the code so that we're still following it in whatever the intent of it was. And so when it came down to some of these changes you're seeing on my spreadsheet, if you go back to the code, you might say, oh, the code says all owners. Yeah, the word living was added to our rule to make sense for our office, because it felt really honestly lame to tell owners you need a signature from a dead person. And so I just wanted to clarify a little bit about the difference. So when you see code changes happening, our office will take the calls and the heat on it because we're the ones implementing it. But at the end of the day, it's county council who makes those calls. Okay, so while the language of the code reads food crops, I covered this a little bit. Foliage, cut and potted flowers, piggeries, dairy, poultry, they're all allowed because they are part of the definition of intensive ag. And so we clarified that in the rules. So in the county code, they also have definitions. And I don't blame you guys if you're just completely blanking out at this point, because it's a lot. But just go ahead and print these. The ones Kapono sends you will be a lot crisper than what you see online. We need to get those updated to look nicer, but I would print these out and have it. So when somebody comes to you and says, I want to do a lettuce farm, what can I do? You can kind of look through this and figure out where they best fit. You know, if you want to do this, and then I get down to the bottom, you'll see where the real differences come in. There is no income requirement for the community food sustainability. So a lot of people do like this program because it's 5 years, there's no income required. It reduces your value to 30% of market. And in 5 years, I'll have to do some donations. And so that's been semi-popular depending where you are on the island, right? If you're in Puna and Ka'u, community food sustainability might actually be lower than your dedicated programs because your value's lower. In West Hawaii and most of Hamakua, that's not going to work out for you. You're going to need to do a dedicated program to see the difference. So for the short term, which is the one in the middle, it's the 2,000 gross income is there. You can show us that income through a Schedule F, which is the farm plan. And remember, it's gross income. You can show a loss. We're not saying you have to show a net profit of 2,000. Most people use that forms to show a loss to reduce their taxes, or the state G49. And that's honestly been more popular or common. And that's the consolidation of your GE taxes at the end of the year. And this is the big asterisk, the or adhere to generally accepted standards or recognized practices within the agricultural community. So are you always going to make $2,000 even if you're raising chickens or hens or horses? No, you're not. You're not going to make that annually unless you're doing it on a large production. So what do you do if you're not making the 2,000? Do the farm plan. And then we have a little note in here. Again, this isn't in the code. This is part of our side on the procedures. Native Hawaiian agricultural farming includes flora for hula and family ranching are recognized practices. So if you're doing tea leaves, but it's not for the laulaus, if you're doing tea leaves for hula skirts, and you have a significant amount of tea leaves, because it's not going to be worth your time to file it for just ornamentals, then you can apply for it. Nothing is preventing any of our cultural practices for Hawaii. Okay. When you go down here, it has the additional documentation. The additional documentation is very similar for all 3 categories. And these are one of the following. It's not all of the following. So you either do a farm plan. We have a template for individuals to fill out. Or if you already have an organic certification from USDA, submit that. That'll qualify you for any of these 3 programs. Or if you already have a conservation plan that NRCS through the local soil and water conservation district already approved, then you can submit that. Because those, along with the USDA food safety certification, those 3 programs to get qualified and approved for are way more intensive and cumbersome than our farm plan. So if you have one of those and on a property, great, that's what they're going to submit. There is an additional thing they added, and that's usually if you haven't even started or you started farming, but you're not making any money yet. So if you do $10,000 in receipts, and I know it sounds huge, but fencing has gone up considerably. If you're putting up fencing and if you're trying to protect any of your crop or livestock from other animals, mostly wild pigs and goats, then you've probably already done 10,000 in fencing. And they just need to be 2 years from the app. Soil, bulldozing, having sprayed your property, getting nutrients back, all of that will add up over time. And so I can't tell you exactly where the 10,000 came from, but that's from the code and county council. I know I get asked a lot, where did they get the 10,000 from? I don't remember where that actually came from. Do you?
No,
okay.
I think it was, yeah.
And then if you're in the long term, this new thing that some of you may already be seeing is these agricultural conservation easements. They're recorded at the Bureau of Conveyance in perpetuity. If you have a property that has that, just make sure your new buyers submit this, because if there is one on the property, then they can get that area, that agricultural use value. That was something that was added at the last minute by a council member. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion on it. We've seen a couple come through. We're not very familiar with it, but we're being told it's becoming a lot more popular on larger acreages, and not just agricultural conservation easements, concert easements as a whole, instead of actually rezoning the whole property. Okay, the breach. So this is one we're all concerned about, right? So what happens if I sell the property and I'm in a 10-year dedication and the buyer does not want to continue? That's where a breach could come in. And that does have ramifications for a rollback of taxes. That's the 10-year. This 3-year program here and the community food sustainability, no breach for a sale. And then this 3-year program, like I said, is similar to the non-dedicated in that if the property sells, then it is going into the new owner would have to reapply. Keita's trying to tell me something. I'm sorry. Okay, the time. Kapono, how much time do we have left? I can rush if I need to.
I don't think we need to rush. I think we're getting a little bit of information. We've lost a little bit of viewers, but we're recording it, so you take all the time that you need.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the community food sustainability is, it's similar. If you go and subdivide or CPR, you're not going to lose it, but the new parcels should apply for the program as well. When you're in a dedicated, the new parcels automatically have that same dedication applied to them. The thing that I like the most about the 3-year program is we don't have to record these dedications. And I cannot stress how much time and work it takes to record, get the money from the applicant, and then record the dedication and make sure it's in a format that the Bureau of Conveyance is okay and good with, and then continue to record them all the time. With this short-term dedication, there's no recordations. So I think that's definitely a positive that it's not recorded. Same thing, non-dedicated ag wasn't recorded. I will tell you, majority of the individuals who have already refiled, even though they weren't required to refile yet, majority of them have refiled for a 10-year. And the reason for that is they don't want to reapply every 3 years. Okay, and then this line below just tells you what the max rollback is. So I covered that there isn't a rollback if the property sells here as far as a breach, but there are other types of rollbacks that can happen. And most of them has to do with you just decided to stop farming or ranching, didn't tell the county, continue to let this ride. The max we can go back is the current plus 2 years on pretty much all of the programs except the 10-year. Keep in mind, there is exceptions to that as well. If there's a natural disaster, if there's crop damage, if there's the death or severe disability of a farmer or rancher. And an example of crop damage would be the coffee beetle borer. A lot of farmers had to cut down their trees at the time because they thought that was the best way to deal with getting rid of it. And we didn't go back. They were trying to get their ground back to a better state. We left the non-dedicated and the dedicated ag ride. And only if they came back or we noticed they ended up doing nothing or they planted a yard and decided they were no longer to be doing farming, did they lose it. But we didn't go backwards. It was just a go forward where the ag was removed from the lower value that went up to market. As far as the renewal process, every 5 years for the community food sustainability, a new app is required in year 2 for the 3-year, because remember that cutoff is September 1. And then as far as the 10-year, then a new app is required in year 9. In all these programs, we do send reminders as a courtesy. People move, mail doesn't get forwarded, others go on vacations, but we do send it as a courtesy. And the very last item here is, what do you need on renewal? For the community food sustainability, that's when you're going to have the $1,000 in annual receipts. And we're not asking for it for all the 5 years you had it, the most recent year. And it could be a combination of $500 to a nonprofit or $500 in sales. It could have been one sale. Maybe you sold one cow, a couple of hens, whatever it is. It's a combination of the 1,000. Okay, and that's the requirements for the program. And I know some of you are going to have to drop off. The ag had so many changes that there are a lot of parts to it. But if you can stay for the benefits, I think that's going to be the most helpful, because who cares about the requirements if you don't think the benefits are worth it, right? So the benefits to this program, and I'm going to open up the other screen and zoom in a little bit. I'm going to skip over if you are really bored and you need material to see when the bill was done at County Council. We have all of that up here. It's all available on Council's records website. You just go and look for the ordinances and you can read them. This says when the application period is. The intensive ag, this is where you get into where your taxes come into play. Community food sustainability, I covered, that's 30% of market value. So if you have $100,000 land value, then you qualify, then you're $30,000. If you are in an intensive ag program, and this is 30% straight down the line. So it's going to be very consistent with community food sustainability. That's where most of the counties have moved to, is a percentage of market value. Whereas intensive ag value, this is going to be your short term in the middle again, and your 10 years. So the long term is going to be your lowest value from the standpoint that you're committing for 10 years. So you should have a lower value per acre. Keep in mind, this is value per acre, not your taxes. You still take this value and multiply it by the tax rate. And so we have a whole handout that just has what those are for every category. And this goes down to the area that has the most abuse, which is pasture and grazing. As you see, it can range from $28 an acre to $420 an acre. If you're talking about a parcel, maybe in part of Kohala, that's worth $500,000, and it's 3 acres, and you go from that higher value to $420 an acre, people are going to continue to apply for it because it's worth the benefit, even if they may not qualify, because they're thinking, and that's what happened with the non-dedicated ag. This is where the largest abuse was. It still is, because we haven't been able to, that program will still go and people can apply for it up until September 1st, 2026. If you're dedicated, it's even lower. It can be $14 to $210 an acre. To give you an idea of what taxes are on $210 an acre, even at the higher ag rate, it's $1.96. So minimum tax is $200. So a lot of times you'll see them paying the minimum tax. Slow rotation and forestry. This is where you might have eucalyptus trees that were being grown for a purpose and not go through. Or you have koa trees that you do plan to harvest and use to sell the koa wood. That is not considered a food group, so it's not applicable under the community food sustainability, but here is the prices per acre for those groups as well. They're only available in your short-term and long-term dedicated. The huge clincher is, if you think community food sustainability sounds good, this might change your mind. Community food sustainability, you do not get the low home site value of $500 on that farm dwelling or the home sites. And that's been very attractive because $500 value on the home site is not heard of in the other counties. The home site value for community food sustainability is similar to the other counties in that it's the proportional market value for that land. So you're not going to get the low $500 home site there. Same thing with all non-active ag areas. And so it makes sense, right? I might have 5 acres. I'm doing 3 acres of ranch land, or let's say I'm raising sheep. But 2 acres is my personal use, and I'm doing what I want on those 2 acres. It's a nice lawn. My kids are riding ATVs on it. Those 2 acres are not going to get the lower agricultural use value, just the 3 acres. But if I have a home on there and I'm in these categories, I'll still get the $500 home site, not if I do CFS. The community food sustainability, I don't get that there. And so that's the biggest differences between these. Because the benefits are so high, and before I switch to the other screen, Kapono, do you have questions on this yet?
Yes, we do have a lot of questions and maybe a little bit of confusion. But maybe to play off of that, I'll start with this question because the question is, what about wasteland? Some properties, particularly on the Hamakua coast, have washed out culverts that make certain portions of the land inaccessible. Their particular question was, would a farm plan need to address those parts, or is it covered, I guess, under that last line there on that spreadsheet that you had?
No. So the non-active ag areas, so there's 2 different types of wasteland. So you have wasteland as it pertains to agriculture. So when you're doing the agricultural app, there is actually a line on there that will be for waste. And let me get back to this side. There is a slide. Oh, it's not showing up on here. When you fill out your actual application, there is, and I'm afraid to go to too many different forms because I'm not sure what's going to show up here, but let's see if I can get to it. There is a part that asks you about waste. Can you guys see my application?
Yes.
Oh, thank God. Okay. So if you see on here, waste area is your very last option. This is on both the community food sustainability and your dedicated. And the last line says incapable of producing materials or services of value related to ag production. So that could be your culverts. That could be your, I'm trying to think of other, your gulches, Blue Rock. Blue Rock is a huge one in West Hawaii. You can't do a whole lot on it unless you bring in big bulldozers and knock out the rock and do something else with it. So that is where you would put your waste area. When you draw the plot map, then you're going to put on there where that waste area is. Usually it runs alongside part of the property through a property. It might be in the middle of it, unfortunately. And then that way we know that area isn't going to show anything because that's considered to be ag waste. Having a river on your property, while it might be very marketable, that would be ag waste because you're not going to, unless you're going to be doing some type of aqua farming, you're not going to be able to utilize that area for your agriculture.
Do ponds count as waste areas?
Ponds can count as waste areas for agriculture unless they are being utilized for your water trough as well. Right? So if you're raising ducks or other animals that like the water, then that's not going to be necessarily considered your waste for ag because you're utilizing it for your farm purpose. But you should still qualify for that lower agricultural use value. Now, if you're talking non-agricultural, then yes, that pond is definitely might be marketable, but it could also increase your insurance quite a bit. And we would just have to take a look at it. Is it a seasonal pond? Is it only a pond when you have that every 25-year storm? So that would get into more of the regular valuation concerns.
Okay, and I think there's a lot of confusion backtracking a little bit with the difference between the 3-year dedication and the 10-year dedication. And for one, I think this question was answered, but just to clarify, the 3-year dedication is not recorded, whereas the 10-year is recorded at Bureau of Conveyances. There's, I guess, technically kind of like a lien on the property. If a property then is sold within the 3-year dedication, the new owner does not need to apply. There's no rollback tax implications there. Is that correct?
That's correct, but the new owner will not get the lower agricultural use value.
Okay. And then for the 10-year, if there is a sale and potentially a breach, there is rollback taxes, correct? That might be assessed.
So this is when the buyer signed the affidavit of continuation at closing?
If they don't, are there rollback taxes
Yes.
applicable? Okay. And then who's responsible for paying those fines? Is it the buyer or the seller?
So typically, if you're going through escrow, and I say typically because I know some people don't use escrow and will hire an attorney instead, escrow will catch that and they'll make sure the affidavit of continuation is signed prior to close of escrow to protect the buyer. If the buyer does not sign it, then usually at closing, they will pull that from the seller side, unless there's an agreement made. Like that's going to have to be part of the discussion when property is purchased.
Okay, and then I guess with all of that, there was one question that came in where how will these programs be monitored or enforced? Are there regular site visits to areas that, these properties are in these programs to confirm that they're doing what they need to do to remain compliant?
So every new application, and that's why council made it a requirement that we had to get renewal applications. So like I said, non-dedicated ag, we weren't getting them. Now it's every 3 years for the 3-year dedication, 5 years for community food, and 10 years for the other. We are required to do a site inspection for each application. Now, when it comes to as we go back out through the year, that honestly, I wish I could tell you we have a compliance team for that. We don't. We have one compliance officer, and they're mostly tasked with short-term rental activity or complaints. So if a complaint comes in, obviously we go out. If there's new permits being pulled, we go out, we look around, there's no ag. If the appraiser is in the area and has their tablet and they can see that this one should have ag, that's great. They can send an inquiry letter. But as far as making sure every year the parcels are looked at, I can honestly tell you it's not going to happen. Not with 14 appraisers and 140,000 parcels.
And I think unless new questions come in, I'm going to end with this one because I know this has kind of been top of mind with our members, and it's going back again to sustainability for, family ranching, the family unit. So, do you have any advice for those property owners who are trying to, farm or ranch family wise is there any, what is the wiggle room for them to get into these programs and maintain the lower property taxes to potentially be able to hold on to their properties?
So I think it's a couple of folds. So there's you have some that meet none of the dedication requirements. Like they're not going to hit 5 acres. I'm going to stick with ranching because that tends to be the biggest one, I think, of concern. So maybe they're 2 acres. And it could have dwindled down to 2 acres where it was bigger before, but they only have 2 acres today. They don't have the $2,000 income requirement, but they are doing family ranching. And maybe they do have family on other parcels, maybe they don't. They're going to have to show at least hit one of the requirements. That would be my biggest recommendation. And Kata's here and he may just roll his eyes and be like, shut up now. But if you're not hitting any of the requirements, it's going to be rough, right? But you can do ranching on 2 acres and make $2,000 a year, gross, not net, gross. So we talked to someone who has a smaller parcel. They've been raising, oh my gosh, the term, what is the one that Charlie had on his property?
Alpaca.
Alpacas, thank you. They were raising alpacas. They were selling the alpacas. You can oddly, learned from these individuals, you can milk alpacas. You can, it's not the best milk, but you can. And you can sell the babies, right? And they're not in constant breeding, but when you sell them, you get quite a bit of money. So they can hit the income requirement without hitting the size requirement. When family ranching comes into play, typically you're seeing a couple of different parcels, different owners, but all the same family that is ranching, and they're rotating amongst themselves. They're all worked together to replace the fencing, but they're not filing Schedule Farm Fs. They're not doing GE taxes. Most of them are still hitting the 5-acre minimum when they add their family parcels together. So that could be done, and that would be shown on the farm plan. So every situation, I have talked to so many, and we've gone out and done individual meetings, because the group meetings with farmers and ranchers, I can tell you now, it works only so far. Kind of like this, like we can't get into, I'm not going to hear every specific example, but when I go to the farm or the staff go, then we see the whole picture. And that's when we can sit down and go, okay, you do qualify if you're looking at it through this. But a lot of times they're sharing more specifics with us. We had a rancher, a farmer, excuse me, recently say, I put on my application, I was going to do pumpkin farming. I did the pumpkins. It didn't work out. I only made money in October. It was a total bust. I pulled all that out, and you got to get in and pull out all the roots too. Otherwise, those pumpkins will just keep coming back. And so now I'm looking at doing that. And we're like, great, you're still falling within your program. You don't have to worry about us coming out for that one day and seeing you have nothing going on. And so a lot of it is conversations with the farmers and ranchers, because every family ranch might be a little bit different. But I hope that helped answer your question a little bit. If they can hit one of those categories, great. If not, then they're really probably community food sustainability.
Okay. And I think one of the programs, or a couple of the programs, might have a requirement of having a certain amount of expenses. Can farm implements, farm tools, tractors, etc., be a part of those expenses?
Absolutely. And that was one of the requirements they could do. They didn't have to do that in addition to a farm plan. But if they want to do that instead of a farm plan, then it's anything. An ATV can be used on a farm.
Okay. And a new question that came in. I understand a 3-year dedication itself doesn't need to be recorded, but does the lease for the agricultural activity need to be recorded, which it does for the 10-year?
Okay, so that's actually really good question, because the way council had written it was everything needed to be recorded if it was a lease. And there's a couple of different leases, right? You have the Kamehameha school leases, which they're not always giving long-term leases anymore, and they're not always recording them. And that would apply, that really affects who applies for the program. So if you are a 3-year lessee from Kamehameha schools, for example, and it's not recorded, then Kamehameha schools needs to apply for the program. If you're talking about maybe I'm leasing to Keita my 3 acres so that he can farm sheep instead, our rules allowed for an unrecorded agreement or contract that I can do with Keita and submit to the tax office. Does that make, so that's another area where we felt like council was very restrictive, and we tried to loosen it a little bit so that everybody wasn't recording, because if you have a loan on your property, or you go and get a loan and they pull up that you have a recorded lease, that may limit your ability to get a loan. At least that's what I was told. So the finance director agreed to allow for unrecorded contracts and unrecorded agreements. So we're not violating what council did, because they called it a lease.
All right, well, thank you for that. And I think that is the last question that we had. I know we're right at about 11:30. This has been a great hour and a half. I think everybody in the room can give a nice round of applause to our real property tax administrator, Lisa Miura, as well as Deputy Administrator Keita Jo. Thank you very much for sticking around and hanging out with us today and getting all this valuable information and knowledge regarding real property taxes and the new agricultural program changes that will be implemented in the coming years. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your Government Affairs Committee, and we'll make sure to get those questions answered. A copy of this recording, as well as the slides and all the documents that we were looking at today, will be distributed to all of our members. So we hope that you can utilize that information, if not for yourselves, and for your clients. Have a great rest of your day. Aloha, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Have a good day.